We're going to hear three conversations. I think you're starting, John.
Yes, that's right. So
thank you very much.
Let's see.
Take it away.
Here we go. All right. Okay. I thought in honor of your name, I'd put up a picture of a stoa that you might just recognize.
Yes, recognize. To tell you, I love those columns.
Well, that's the beauty of a stoa. It's the columns take pride of place.
They do, and I also love what they're made of because I think it's perfect. So thank you very much for both your design and your humor and the whole 9 yards. Thank you.
No, thank you, Nia. Right, so let's go. Well, for the last century or more, housing in the United Kingdom has been built as single-use suburban estates like this, each providing for a relatively narrow socioeconomic group. So as people's circumstances evolve, they're left with no choice but to move away. The result has been that none of these places have been able to evolve into a true community. In spite of this, over the last 30 years, there have been some exceptions that have bucked this trend and have been designed and built with the aim of encouraging people to settle and make roots so that new communities may grow and flourish. Poundbury is one that most of us know about, but there are others, such as Fairford Leys in Aylesbury and Dickens Heath near Birmingham, which have been built based on a very similar model and have been designed as attractive places in which to live. This is Dickens Heath. We were commissioned by the local authority to design a master plan for a new settlement for a town of about 2,500 people. And it was on a greenfield site, and the buildings were used in the traditional manner to create a network of streets and squares. You can see here the main square at the center of the town. Dickens Heath operates very much like a traditional market town, providing a local center not just for the people living there, but for those living in the surrounding countryside, so they don't have to travel a long way into Birmingham. So people do come by car, but they also have a good and frequent bus service, which is centered on the town itself. To the left in the square, for instance, you've got a small hotel with a restaurant ground floor. A supermarket is on the opposite side with affordable housing on top, and a post office and some shops and offices behind that. The tower at the back is part of an office building there. And here you see a restaurant spilling out onto the square. This is the public library facing the square itself on the other side of the road. And you can just see the red brick building behind that, which is the health center. And the tower of the public library is designed to be seen along the streets leading towards the square, which are lined with shops and restaurants. And when designing places like this, there are 5 essential but simple principles that we follow. Napoleon, of all people, put his finger on the first when he described St. Mark's Square in Venice as the most splendid drawing room in Europe. It's this sense of enclosure that makes St. Mark's work so beautifully. This, by necessity, of course, requires buildings to be linked to form a continuous facade, or at the very least, buildings that are closely positioned, where people can come right up to the building. In the case of St. Mark's, made all the more attractive by an arc surrounded with cafes and shops. This is the key characteristic that makes an urban space, which needs to be replicated throughout a town or city to make it work properly, as you get in historic Italian cities. And it also has to work even when you have residential space at the ground floor, and do so without compromising privacy or sacrificing the space at the ground level. These are buildings that we've recently designed for the new English Quarter at Val d'Europe at Marne-la-Vallée, just outside Paris. They do just this, using a series of simple architectural devices, such as loggias, as you saw in the previous slide, or On this slide, railings on the left-hand side of the slide, or simply hedges along footpaths, paths like this. In most English towns and cities, this is traditionally done with railings combined with a clever manipulation of levels. You see this everywhere in London, and this is just what we've done here at our buildings at Old Church Street. The buildings that you see here in this slide are all new. And besides stopping the curious from pressing their noses against the window, the railings provide a visual continuity for defining the edge of the street. I think this is illustrated even better in the Vincent Square project, which we've also done in London. We were presented with a city block which was too narrow to accommodate gardens at the back of the buildings. So instead, we provided those gardens at the sides, creating gaps in the frontage facing the square. With railings of sufficient scale, as you see here, the continuity and enclosure is maintained despite the relative transparency of the railings. The second principle is almost too straightforward to mention. Families grow and people get older. So in order for a community to develop, you need to provide residential accommodation and facilities capable of supporting everyone at all stages of life. These are terraces of houses we designed at Poundbury with gardens at the back. We also designed terraces of smaller properties like this. There are apartments above shops, as you see, arranged in this slide. They're arranged around a courtyard in the Italian manner. And then there are small mews with apartments above garages, and then individual large family homes and gardens. And it goes without saying too that it's not only the size of the homes that's important, but also the nature of their tenure. You need affordable for key workers, sheltered for the old, rented accommodation for those that need it. And these days, with prohibitively high property prices, discounted properties to help the young onto the property ladder. It's also reasonable to assume that a community is unlikely to develop around residential accommodation alone. This is the first public building that was built at Poundbury in the very first phase. We designed it as a market hall at ground level with a community hall above. As a public building, it's designed to stand out in contrast with the surrounding buildings with steep roofs and rustic columns. It dominates Hummery Square, which is central to the neighborhood and around which other facilities are grouped, like a pub, a shop, a cafe, and so on. Employment buildings too are provided amongst the residential blocks, and it's precisely around such work and leisure facilities that the social interaction thrives. For this to work successfully, these facilities need to be conveniently located so they appear to be easily accessible, only a short walk away. Once people get into their cars, there's no telling where they will go, and it's important for the economic viability of these businesses that they don't unnecessarily lose customers. And this brings me to my third principle, which is that in order to achieve this, any settlement, town or city needs to be laid out as a series of quasi-autonomous neighborhoods, with the overriding intention being to encourage people to walk rather than use their car. This makes for a more comfortable and leisurely existence for the residents. It also increases chance encounters and community interaction and leads to a healthier lifestyle in safer, more attractive places that everyone can enjoy. And I'm going to take you now through a series of slides that illustrate how we designed Fairford Leys, which was devised as an urban extension to Aylesbury, providing just over 2,000 dwellings to the town. First slide shows the way the neighborhoods were positioned, almost as if they were a series of villages located in open countryside, each no more than 10 minutes walk away from the next. Each circle here represents the radius of 400 meters, about a 5-minute walk. These so-called villages would become the neighborhood centers, where any house within the red circle is no more than a short 5-minute walk away from its local center. The most direct routes between the centers was reserved for pedestrian and cycle routes. The next slide shows how major infrastructure, such as roads, were threaded through so as not to interfere with this basic organization, while at the same time being used to service and provide good vehicular access to the uses such as the business uses and the schools, etc., that have been arranged to relate to each of the individual neighborhoods, as you can see there. The following slide deals with the form of the architecture and structural landscape and sets out a hierarchy between the neighborhoods. So the central one is designed as the main center for the overall development, designed to be more dense, and was given a very different character from everything else, as you can see there. Almost as if it was an old walled town with a hard edge surrounded by a riverine corridor, which is something we needed to incorporate within the site or running through the site, which fortuitously provided us with a ready-made surrounding moat. This set up the basic structure that endured and ensured that as the plan was developed out, this basic organization of neighborhoods persisted and enhanced by the architecture, which was set using a design code and devised to work alongside the master plan. I should add that this was the only project where we managed to get a new church built in the center. There were 14 shops, including supermarket, cafes, and a number of restaurants with a gym, health center, community center, and a nursery school, as well as a primary school, and various other business uses as well. These slides, or the following slides, will give you a flavor of what Fairford Leys has turned out to be like. This is one of the gateways into the central neighborhood, with the riverine park crossed by a bridge that you see here in the foreground. Inside the walled town is a network of tight streets and squares, which you see here being enjoyed by the townsfolk during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations for the late Queen Elizabeth II last year. As you come out of the central area and go over the bridges into the three surrounding neighborhoods, you get a more relaxed character that you would expect based on the local architectural vernacular, which becomes almost rural at times as you come to the edge. Fairford Leys was built out by a series of developers and house builders based on our master plan and held together by the design code. The fourth principle concerns the design of the urban blocks themselves. Block sizes and how they're designed differ from one city to another and from one country to the next, depending on the local tradition. Each has generated different building forms to deal with that. In Italy, where cities were confined by defensive walls, the blocks understandably are relatively small, generating the palazzo model with an internal cortile. This is a master plan that we designed a few years ago for a new quarter in Bologna. In England, though, where the terraced house is the basic dwelling form, block sizes are comparatively large, 60 to 90 meters wide and up to 100 meters long. Blocks of this size generate an internal muse at the center once the terraced buildings, or whatever buildings there are around in the block, are set out around the edge. In English towns, this space was historically used to service the buildings which are facing the street, and as a result are relatively less formal in character, able to accommodate a variety of uses in a manner that would not be possible on the street or in the square. This is a picture of a traditional muse, probably dating back to the 18th century, where most of the buildings that you see here had probably started life off as stables or staff accommodation. That was subsequently repurposed, probably in the to middle 20th century for cars and chauffeurs, with some turned into businesses, as you see by the Volkswagen sign you see in the center of this picture. More recently, of course, as property values soared in London, they became bijou apartments and pied-à-terres which were extremely desirable. Here is one in Westminster that appears to have gone full circle and reverted back to a stable again. You can see from this just how flexible these news areas can be. And they are important, therefore, in that they provide a means of accommodating different and sometimes incompatible uses, which can be set literally cheek by jowl. Small workers' cottages at the back can be put in within a whole area full of large, grand houses. They can also accommodate gardens, which many London squares do, or facilities such as children's play areas, or allotments away from the main street, or indeed business uses or workshops at the back of shops, serving maybe a square or something like that. So this allows for the flexibility, which is essential for the changing needs of an ever-evolving community. Now, I put these two next slides together to show you that you can also get a muse, which is a very pleasant, tranquil, and beautiful place, which is a sanctuary in the middle of a city. This is the muse that we designed going through that archway that you've just seen in the project that I showed you much earlier on Old Church Street, when we were talking about the railings. The fifth and final principle is to do with identity and fitting in. By giving the buildings the appropriate architecture that relates to the locality, you make even a new place look like it belongs. And by doing so, you reinforce the diversity and character of different regions and show respect to the cultural identity of the local community. It's quite straightforward. To ignore this without good reason makes a development stand apart from everything around it, and unsurprisingly can be an affront to those already living there. Just how desirable and attractive Poundbury, Fairford Leys, and Dickens Heath have proven is best reflected in the premium that buyers have been paying to live there. Residents clearly appreciate living in a place conceived of as a neighborhood and walkable community. For society, the advantages are more profound. This way of building provides greater well-being and a healthier population. A more sustainable infrastructure organized to be less wasteful on energy, with buildings built to last in an attractive and beautiful environment. By encouraging people into close-knit, secure communities, they're more self-reliant, which perpetuates a lifestyle that's pleasant, less stressful, and conducive to sound mental health. What's more, it picks up on the local architectural vernacular and the cultural identity of existing communities, and allows that to evolve and thrive in a natural manner. There are probably many more, but one further advantage which should not be ignored is that they are much more compact and less hungry on land. Considering the amount of housing that we need to build over the next decade, particularly in the highly populated parts of the world, this is very significant. It will allow us to retain what is in these times possibly the most precious commodity of all, the open countryside. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I can now, I think, hand over to Phil. Phil, would you like to take over?
Yes, let's see if I can successfully do that. So what I'm going to show is an established community in Washington, D.C. It's the Capitol Hill Historic District, and it dates back to the original layout of the city by Pierre L'Enfant in the late 1790s. And the project, there are several projects I'm going to show. The first two are by actually designed by my partner in all ways, Amy Weinstein, FAIA. Both of us graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in the mid-70s. And Amy originally apprenticed at Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown's office. And then we moved to Washington, D.C., where we started our careers after these apprenticeship periods. And the project I'm showing, this first project, was a failed housing project in 1940. And it's in a community that is better represented by the buildings on the left, which was how the city developed over a couple of hundred years, or 150 years. And so that pale green color in 1887 is where the project is, but where there used to be street-facing townhouses served by alleys. There are finer little alleys in there, and with alley dwellings within that space. And in 1940, the federal government decided to do low-income housing, and it's in that same green area. And you can see the pattern of the buildings was not based on Oscar Newman's defensible space, but quite the opposite, on open green spaces that belong to no one. And you saw in the previous slide how the effect of that. And then, of course, in 1970, highways were cut crisscross through all of the country. That's Robert Moses and that kind of theory of building highways that would then bisect cities and destroy whole communities at the time. And it lopped off a piece of that site. And then in 2000, under what was called the Hope 6 Housing Project Initiative, it was a housing and urban development program to provide to mixed income communities. Amy designed this project that brought in new streets with street-facing housing strips, and even a muse where you see these little green houses, and I'll show you what that looks like. And so the idea was to bring in this mixed income housing and have it be seamlessly connected into the surrounding community. And you can see on the right some of the surrounding housing, and then the new buildings that were brought in with some little bit of parking sprinkled in there. And this housing project, and I'll show you another one soon after it, is very close to, it's one block to the right-hand side of the screen. There's a high street with shops and all kinds of local services. And also about 3 blocks north, there's a community center with a farmer's market, a shed and actually a market building, and other retail that's along a part of Pennsylvania Avenue, all of which is only 7 blocks east of the US Capitol. And on the left side of the screen, you can see all the various types of facades that Amy came up with for this project. And this isn't even half of the facade designs that were done for the project to create individuality and richness to this piece of the city fabric that's been amended here. And it's representative of the wide variety of architectural expressions typical of Victorian and the last 200 years in Washington. Buildings that are short and tall, all jammed together into one wonderful melange, but all defining the public right-of-way, because that's one aspect of Washington, is that building to your property line, and in some cases beyond it, under certain provisions, is very much the tradition of the city. And here you can see one of the edges of the building, a group of buildings opposite existing city fabric that is pretty much undistinguishable from what we've done here. And you can see some of the influence of Victorian buildings on the left, and then various periods of architecture. And they weren't trying to look like perfect buildings. They were trying to look like some of the more generic, I wouldn't call it middle income, but not wildly exotic or rich housing. And so as you drive up the street and turn left, this entire street you're looking down is all new. And it shows the kind of change in heights of buildings that is typical of the rest of this part of the city, of this historic district. So by having a variation of each building type, it creates actually the rich stew that is Capitol Hill, but all within certain boundaries of overall height or shortness and a various architectural detailing of windows and cornices. And you can see even, let me go to the next slide. You can even see that some of it is like not is a pale color brick with a cornice that sort of stops awkwardly the way they do elsewhere in this part of the city. So there's a sense that there's a facade, in Venturi's terms, a decorated shed, and then a plain Jane facade. And then you've got these rich brick facades and these two little houses with roof shapes on them. And you can see both the short and the tall. And this is all a mixed income housing. Some of them 2-story units, some flats, some of them are down in an English basement, but they have what John was talking about earlier. They have fences and stoops to create that layering of public, private, public, and private space. That sort of hierarchy of urban spaces that we weren't necessarily taught at the University of Pennsylvania, but if you lived in Philadelphia for a dozen years, you certainly picked up on that, and you understood that from places like Society Hill and Pine Street and large parts of Philadelphia. And here are some beautiful cast stone facades on the left there that are sort of green. They're supposed to be like serpentine stone with brown stone details. You can see somebody sitting there on the bench. And one of the wonderful aspects of this project is that the law that set up this housing program was that all the units are indistinguishable one from the other, whether you're making 30% of average median income or 130% of average median income. Your unit is no different than anyone else's. You don't have sort of the red letter A for affordable housing sewn onto your chest like the Pilgrims would for adulterers. And so that's one of the nice aspects of this. And then as people move in or move out, there's a management mechanism to make sure that the mix of units, not any specific unit, but the overall mix of units maintains a certain cross-section of income. Now, further on down the street, so if you turn left a moment ago and went down the High Street, Main Street, which by the way is calibrated to be the width of other streets in this part of town, you then see this wonderful pair of siblings that define the entrance to a muse. And when you drive down that muse, people can park their cars, and they have units that are like one flat over another. So they're 2-level units, and you sleep upstairs. And so if people are walking along the street, they may be walking near your living room and dining area, but they're not, you don't have your head on a pillow and look out at eye level, a person walking by. And here's the view down that muse. So what I like to say on the left, that's the year 2000 when the project was first done. On the right, 2023. So this was taken just recently. We had to wait until the winter because the trees have so flourished that it's hard to take a picture in the summer. And so this has just been a beloved part of the neighborhood. And it took a while to get some of the people in the community because mixed income housing, anything you describe in the United States as affordable, whatever it sounds like as a euphemism for public housing, really gets people very anxious. And so the one aspect of this is that the architecture made this a seamless part of the city. And I think that once the objections were overcome, not of everyone, but of enough people, and once this project was done, I think it really raised the level of acceptance of this kind of development in the city. And there are other projects similar to this that were done under that program. It's sort of the same program where high rises that were done in the 60s were demolished and then replaced actually with denser housing, like this did, but low rise and much more beautifully crafted, and with more traditional relationships between where you drive, the curbs, the trees, your front yard, your facades. And there's a lot to be said for everybody being able to say, that's my house. It's the one with the green trim, or I live on the side of the twin there with the pale blue. And then Amy also, because this is a critical thing, is to make this kind of architecture affordable, this kind of rich masonry. And we do have masons who can do this. you have to work with the brick manufacturers and the masons. And so Amy came up with this special shaped brick that can be laid flip-flop from course to course. And that's how these panel brick, it's called panel brick, how this gridded brick cornice panels were done in the lower left without creating within the cavity, because it's cavity wall, without creating a way to arrest any incidental water that came in there. You wanted a smooth back, but you also you certainly don't want people laying bricks. We couldn't take a header and put it into the thickness of the wall because it's only a veneer brick. So this creates that light and shadow effect. And you'll notice that even using the same brick, same general approach to the facade, the colors are different so that everybody can actually identify, oh, that's my house, it's the gray one. I live upstairs. I live in the English basement. You walk up the stoop to my house. So now let's go to a project that's several blocks north of here with easy walking distance, where there's a connection to the Washington Underground Metro rail system. And here's a picture of it. So if you were to go diagonally down your screen into your desk on Pennsylvania Avenue, you hit the Capitol in about 5 blocks. Well, there's the historic Eastern Market Metro designed by Adolf Kloos. It's an architect who came to DC from Germany in the mid 1800s, had a profound effect on the city because he's the one who suggested, and it was accepted, to allow people to build bay projections on the fronts of their houses. And the quid pro quo was that the city no longer needed to take care the green space between the front of your facade, which is the property line, and the curb. That in fact, you now have to take care of the green space between the front of your house and the back of the sidewalk. And as an offset, you can have bays, balconies, other kinds of projections. And there you can see the Metro stop, Eastern Market, and then a junior high school that replaced the Victorian school. At the same time, C Street, as you can see, was closed. And it used to be that on that open lot on weekends, it was a big flea market. So the flea market people were part of the stakeholder group in getting this project approved. You can see the market shed, and then you can see some of the buildings. Actually, Amy designed the building in the upper left-hand slide, the upper left-hand corner building. And then just some of the other buildings, you can see the difference in heights and architectural character. So here's how the block was laid out. In Washington, where we actually create public rooms along our streets, you really design the facade for your building almost as though it was an interior design project where you were in let's say a gallery, and hung on the walls of that gallery are pictures of domestic life. And those are the window frames that you look through when you look into someone's living room or you see them washing dishes or going about the day-to-day routines, that those pictures in that gallery make up this gallery and public salon, this wonderful public room that is an agreement among people. As a way of creating a new piazza for that public flea market, C Street was reopened, but as Woo North, it had a curbless street where you could actually set up tents on the weekend and also along 7th Street on the lower part. And so their 8th Street component is all residential across the street. 7th Street, at the base of the office and of what's called a plaza component, which was also residential, that's also retail. All the parking enters on the cusp between the plaza component and 8th Street. So even when C Street is closed, you can sneak into the garage. And then all the loading for this is in the middle of this block, underneath the word office component. And it all comes through this one curb cut on 7th Street. And then below the 8th Street component along Pennsylvania is actually below grade Trader Joe's Market, which is catnip for urban dwellers. And then to the left, you'll see North Building. That's actually not lower income, but it's an affordable housing component that is financed under what's called LIHTC. And it sits above retail. And all of it rendered, once again, seamlessly. You can't tell income level one from the other. So that's the affordable housing component done with terracotta shingles laid vertically, brick, and then brick base. And then the ends, though they look different, it's the exact same program and size. It's to break the building down in scale. And you can see that one off. And here's a view from the other direction. You can see the fence and rose bushes, people can personalize things. Here's the building across the street from that. This is it's called market rate, called unaffordable housing. And this is along 8th Street. So even though this is one apartment building with a corridor, you can enter individual units through this fence. So their English basement units are directly accessible, as well as from the corridor inside. And the main entrance over on the lower left, 333, that's the apartment building entrance. And once again, you see the layer of space. This is a view from the other direction. And so some precedents from DC of buildings of the Victorian period. Here's a head-on using cast stone, brick, and slate. Here's a panel brick on crazy on the left side there. These are different shapes that are put together, and it's a veneer wall, and it has the same richness in it. And it's really based on what you see in here, and also weavings by Annie Albers. There's a view of that housing. There's the entrance to Trader Joe's. And then one of the sponsors actually made the molds, the rubber form liners for this thin brick facade that goes up and twists and turns. So it's a recall of corbelled brick. And then these double height windows reduce the apparent scale of the project. And because they're vertical, in proportion, they recall the Victorian buildings nearby. And as that building goes down the block, it changes color, but it's still an office building for some part of it. There's a close-up of that. Really beautiful facade, to my mind. And there's some kids in that piazza. They have one of these fountains. They run around and go nuts. And there's the flea market on the weekend. So now I'd like to show you some of the larger projects in town, but how we civilize them as they come to grade. So these are, what you see here are 2 of 3 buildings at this one intersection. One's hidden by the building on the left. But as they come down, once again, we calibrate the cross-section of the street so that you can have a cafe, shade, we have a harsh climate. So you want to shade people from the south sun with these trees and then these planting beds. And if you were to come around the corner where this guy's looking at his phone and then go down the side street, because this is this facade is on Massachusetts Avenue, which is one of our larger streets, you'd find that we have a way to walk up directly into an apartment overlooking an areaway. So while in many cases, units on the ground floors would be the ones that are discounted, you can actually increase their value by telling people who ride their bicycles, they can go right out their door and go by cycling, or they can take a dog out and walk it. So they have a sense of ownership, and they can put decorative plantings here. And if you have a cat, you can leave them out down here, or a dog in this areaway. We've done this on several projects. Here's another big project, and you can see a little homage to Lewis Kahn with that split corner like Exeter Library. There's some people walking out of their unit, the same kind of treatment, this sort of kind of hierarchy of facade elements that creates a cornice line above those little Juliet balconies that aligns with 2-story townhouses across the street. And so this project had no opposition. And here's another tall project where you have a fence, you're right at grade, and once again, cyclists really like these events. And then the last one I'll show, this is a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-story building that sets back and goes up another 5 in honor, in respect of historic buildings across the street. They're only 67 feet high. So we did this embellishment on the top. And then each one of these vertical openings at grade is a unit. It's a 13-foot wide unit. And inside is a 2-story space, and your sleeping quarters, your bed is on a balcony overlooking that space. And now, since this photo is new, there's a 3.5-foot high fence here and green, thick hedge, and people come out there and have a glass of wine in the evening. So it responds to the Hayden's gardens directly across the street. And since this is called the Whitman, the cornice up here on the left is embossed with leaves of grass, a la his quotes.
Thank you, Phil. That's very interesting. Raymond, do you want to take over?
Yes, thank you, Phil, thank you, John. So I'm going to start to share my screen. Okay, as you know, my company name calls Paris Classical Architecture. I try to find two projects that we made from last decade. And to begin, I would like to share a little urban story about Paris. On the screen, as you can see, there is a square, really like a square. This is a square called Place des Vosges. This is the very first urban design project happened in France. It's during 1600 to 1612, and it's made by Henry IV. And this square, as you can see here, it's all similar pavilions, except the two pavilions on the north and the south. One is the King Pavilion, another one is the Queen Pavilion, where you can enter to this square. At that time, you have to imagine that Paris is full of old buildings, narrow streets, and this area is the only area where you can see the light, where you can see the sun, where you can see the sky. So this place was made for the royalty and some key national activities here. And from this point, I want to take you to 4 centuries later, where we are invited to do some urban design from a point of view from France. So fasten your seatbelt, let's go. The first city, well, the 2 examples I took are both from China. We got this chance to work with many international architecture and projects. And this project, we do it alone, Chinese architect. And the reason is I was born in Taiwan, so I can have this I can have this 2 culture and two language. So I'm going to start from this one. Okay, the city called Nanning. It's a city on the south of in the south of China. It's not a big city in China. We put the cities in 3 categories. The best is like Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, the very international, very large mega city. And then you have a secondary, which is major city of each department. And then you have some local city. This one is one of the local city, how we call it, but you have to try to imagine that populations are way more than what we can imagine in Europe or in the United States. Even it's a very little city, you have a lot of populations. Okay, on this project, our plot is located in kind of urban floating lake. It's here where you can see there's a road coming here, and all these areas around are they will be flooding during the monsoon season because it's in the south of China. On the right side here, we will get closer to the heart of the city, and on the left side here is more industrial offices, and our project is just located in between. The client comes to us and saying that they don't want classical, large, contemporary office building. They would prefer to have like a little town. So they ask us to break the square meters into many different small houses and to organize it as a little village. And this is our very first sketch, showing the 42,000 square meters, how we dispose on this area. So in the middle here, you can see there is like a little harbor. And then on the north here, you have a little lake, kind of separating the main road and our village. These are artificial water ponds, and the water will be something like half meter to 1 meter, not more than that. And underneath, you will find the parking. So in fact, the structure, everything you can see here are based are above the huge area of a parking. And then we get into more into the spaces and the distances between the pavilion that we want to create to organize this kind of small urban areas, or kind of a waterfront walk, and then also this kind of fountain in front of the entry. This is the secondary entry. This is the major entry with a greater building, greater tower, and then there's another one coming from main road. Our idea is when people get into this village that we create, they can feel that they are transported to another country, another atmosphere, and it's totally different. You don't feel that you are anymore in China. And this is how the Chinese like, because this is kind of a travel in a city. You don't have to buy the air ticket. You don't have to take a train. Just take a taxi, then you arrive in somewhere that the atmosphere is totally different and make you disconnected with that city you are living. So this is the traffic plan where you can see the pedestrian. We're going inside with the blue line, so no car in our little village. And then you will have the car park, which is on the street side here, aligned with the street side. And then you will have this harbor area where you can have this kind of little boat next to the pond here. This is natural, and this is artificial. Here are some key buildings that we put it to make kind of a landmark that people can see. On the courtyard north here, the square on the north, we have the major building here, which is in green. This is the theater. And on the south part, we have another kind of large wedding banquet house that you can have kind of large event activities here. And on the right side here, this is another kind of theater. And then, of course, you will have also some technical buildings, which is in the light blue colors. And then finally, you have a hotel, which is on the left side here in red. Yeah. And the restaurant on the northeast in the purple, light purple. So these key buildings, we place them to be seen and attract people and create the skylines. And the rest of it, they are offices and some retails. The drawing showing the view axis. You have two major view axes from the street. And then once you arrive in the center here, you have another view east-west to the pond, to the lake. And then you will have this major area in the south here, and then on the north here. Finally, you will have the parking, as I said, aligned with the street side. So in order instead of creating a facade aligned with the street, we totally do it differently, and we try to create kind of greenery on the street side. The goal is to separate the real city and the village that we are creating. So this is some greenery that we put on our project. We have more organic greenery facing to the nature park, which is the lake side, and then more organized tree planted on the street side in order to follow the parking module. And finally, we have this kind of very dense plantation and vegetation to separate our village and the street which belongs to the city. And of course, in the center part, we have some trees close to the waterfront where people can have nice terraces or restaurants or cafe. This is the facade that we created at the very beginning. As you can understand, this is an office project. This is an office project. And everything you see here behind is like a huge open space for the offices. And so we have to follow certain module distance, but in the same time, we have to make the facade that looks like different building in different style, made in different time in the story. So the lower one is a section going through the north and south, where you can see the very shallow water piles, and it's artificial, of course. And then on each side, you have the major building looking to this central areas. On the right side is our very early stage sketch, where you can see the buildings, and the south you have even a tower, and on the north is more like two line of townhouses. And on the upper left side is the final version that we admitted the tower. We thought this is maybe too important to that city, and then we prefer to create one tower in the middle of you can see in the picture. This is some CGIs that we presented to the city and to the client to get approval, and it's approved. So the upper left, you can see the view from the street, where is a public street, and then to go into that village, you have to cross the river and then go in under that gate. And once you go after that gate, and you will discover a new village, totally disconnected with the city and the atmosphere of the city. This is the picture that you took right after the construction. So you can see people are taking the pictures from the outside of the city. And on the upper right side, you can see the buildings around our project. It's so different. So let's go on the Google. So this is the city. As you can see, on the left side here is mainly industrial. On the east side here is more organic. As you can understand, this is a very old urban tissue that haven't been touched, and I believe this street they will continue and cut everything here and build more buildings. So this is the one of the project, and let's go on the next one. So here's the Beijing, and on the east side, about 6 kilometers, 6 hours drive, you have a city called Qinhuangdao. And this city is famous for the beautiful beaches. So a lot of high-end hotels build their nice hotels facing to the sea. And our clients wants to create a project. As you know, in China, the communist, you don't have right to own the land. You can rent the land from the government, and then you have the right to build the building and use it. If it's residential, it's 70 years. If it's the offices, it's for 50 years. After that, you will have to rent again the land. Otherwise, the city will just take it back if they need your land. So this owner creates his own land on the ocean at the exit of this river side and close to the beaches here. His vision is to create the new attraction because the city is already very compact with all this kind of very organized industrial way of urban design, which looking for the best, the most square meter that they can build. Okay, and in this island, we present them some different ideas, which you will see. This is the kind of architecture that you can find in this city. On the seaside, you have the tall hotels buildings. And on the continental side, you have all these kind of high-rise housings, like 40 floors, 30 floors. And then some part you will see this kind of little housing, but with kind of a fancy European architecture. We don't know why. And sometimes you will see this kind of Art Deco buildings. And of course, you have the futurist building like the upper left side you can see. This is the picture taken 10 years ago. So I believe today is already everything done. And here I want to show you very quickly. This is the vision that built it by the Chinese architects. And our client is not satisfied with it because he feels something's missing. That's why they come to us. Of course, this kind of project is very fancy when you create it on the 3D. You know, you have no idea of how people is going to use it and how people will feel. So this is the Chinese vision of how they would like to build this island, and we proposed in different way. We wanted to create the island with two parts. One part is high-rise building, another part with more nature. And then like Venice, we have the Grand Canal going through it. And then on the other side, we will have the harbor. This idea was not really accepted at the beginning because the client not happy that we break the island and having a water inside. However, we try to convince him, okay, we don't cut it in two, but we can have a lake in the middle because this island is so big. From the north to south is 1.4 kilometer, and from the east to west is like 900 meters. So if you don't have something open and peaceful in the middle of the island, this island will look like downtown Manhattan. And so we try to convince him to have an open space. That's why we show him some nice picture, have side, and then the ocean side view on the same island. So this is the study model that we use China to convince the client. And once he understood that by losing the land in the middle of the island, that creates more agreeable and pleasant urban spaces. So here you can see there is on the right side, here's the low density buildings where you have the nice villas facing to the ocean. And then on the left side here, between the lake and the harbor, you have this kind of high-rise building where you have all these commercial activities. And then on the south, it's like Manhattan. You have the high-rise office buildings in the group. And on the north, you have more commercial activities, but in a large scale. And then on the upper left side here, we create kind of a little village, which is more human scale. This is a picture showing how we do with the traffic. On the upper right side, the island is linked with the continent with tunnel. So once the car go out, they can go all around the city, the island, and then go into each different blocks. And then you will have the pedestrian on the lower right side, which is the dashed line. In this pedestrian or area has different atmosphere. Either we are in lake view, either we are in a very commercial street, either we have the harbor view. And then on the upper left side, you can see the orange, the housings. The purple are equipments, public equipments. The red are the commercial retail buildings. Blue are offices, and then green, they are the open spaces. And also the most important is in this island, on each corner of this island, you are able to see either the lake in the middle, the sea view. And also we use this kind of on the right hand section, the villas has a view to the ocean, and the seaside walk has also the view to the ocean. And with this kind of organization, no one is disturbed. This is our very beginning study model, showing the massing that which I just presented. And then this is where we are today. This is the final CGI that we send it to the client and approved by the city. This is some CGI that shows the atmosphere of when once it's built. So all these buildings, they are just suggestion. This is not what we will really build it. The owner has a right to hire a different company and architect to build the building on each plot that he divided on this land. Otherwise, this client wants to be the king, a kind of king on this island that he owns. And that's my presentation. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, Phil, I really quite liked some of your detailing that you had on some of those buildings and the various ornament that you got on there. In the first project that you showed, I can't remember the name. There's quite a lot of a range of different types of buildings, etc. I just wondered whether there was any logic in the way the different types of buildings were arranged around there, whether there was some pattern that you were picking up from, that relates to Washington or anything like that, or whether they were just designed that way because they looked good.
Yeah, could you repeat that for a sec?
Oh, I was just wondering whether the way in that first project that you showed, I can't remember the name at the moment, but there was, you had house buildings which were had very distinct styles to them.
Yes.
Some were more Victorian, some were
right.
more classical, etc. And I wondered whether there was a pattern that you'd picked up that you used to do that, or some sort of logic, or whether it was just random.
Oh, it's composed, but the groupings of buildings were of like a length of 3 buildings or 5 buildings. That is definitely precedented in the Capitol Hill. So at different eras, people would build 3 or 4 little flat-fronted 2-story houses. And then you go around and you find some grand Victorian houses. And, they came in different sort of lengths of chewing gum, as it were. And within them, they also knew to differentiate each one so that people could say, that's my house. So very clever, and with usually more than just color. And you'll notice some of the buildings had flat fronts and some had bays. And that happens about, I think it's after 1858. We're allowed to project half the facade forward 4 feet.
And in the muse areas at the back, or did that one not have muse areas? I can't remember.
The first one
it did have muse areas. That's right.
Yeah.
Was there any relationship between what you did in the muse areas to what was on the street, or was it sort of in terms of style and in terms of the types of buildings? I was just wondering whether, when you go into an organically grown development, something that's grown over time, you tend to get a sort of pattern where things sort of tend to congregate in certain places. I know that might not apply in Washington, but it probably does, where you see that kind of thing develop and you get certain types of buildings in the center, or predominantly, then you get, it's a bit like an onion, things sort of grow in rings around it. And whether there was any sort of type of pattern like that might have informed it.
Amy
let me answer that.
Thank you.
Is the author of that.
So in Washington, D.C., the streets define our big squares, but then when there are minor streets coming through, they're called places. And our muse was Ellen Wilson Place. And it was modeled on some other places elsewhere on Capitol Hill, which had very short distances from the curb to the back of the property and not enough room for backyards. So those buildings all had side yards. And that defined a different typology of building. I hope that answers.
Very interesting. Yeah. Raymond, you showed the Place de Vosges at the beginning. Said this is at last. This was quite. I mean, you presumably showed it because it probably would have contrasted with the rest of Paris when it was first built.
Exactly, because this is a very good example that is showing we have this willing to do the urban design. So at the beginning, it's a geometry. It's geometry where we want to find the spaces, we want to find the lights, and after all, this is the very basic need. This is a basic need. And
what I was coming to was that the thing about Place de Vosges is that, as you pointed out, it sort of has survived hundreds of years. Because it was built in a way which had could be adapted as time went on, even if you had, despite the revolution and all sorts of things that happened in the interim period. The question is, with Village Project that you showed as the first project, how do you see that surviving in the future? I mean, can it only work as an office, and then once it stops being an office, was that something you took into account as you were planning it?
Well, this is also one of my, how to say, my question, because the architecture in China is like the life of architecture in China is very short. We don't really have monuments, and the most important monuments may be the Great Wall, because we cannot destroy it. So this is just so grand. And the life in China, we always think the architecture is for like 100 years. If I am rich enough, I create my architecture, but my next generation will not like my architecture or my buildings. They will just destroy it and build something more different. And this is kind of a fashion. This is a kind of fashion. That's why they don't hesitate to turn the back to the city in order to create something in common, in harmony with the city. Like this project, you can see. Let me just put the back.
Like it, and all like it, they might want to keep it, and you can still design it so that it can be used, because you don't know. I mean, that might be the attitude today, given the ideas of sustainability and all that kind of thing. It's quite likely that even in China, they might start taking these ideas on, and might like it sufficiently to want to keep it.
Mm-hmm. Well, for instance, people like it, but this kind of fashion bit changes a lot. I remember about 15 years ago, we did this project in Beijing. It's like a French grand classical architecture of 77 villas in 16 different types. At that time, this was the most luxury architecture. But 15 years later, this is not anymore the most luxury project. People are more like in the very chic, how the old houses renovated with the modern technology. You see, the richness, the definition of richness, this is not anymore by the architecture. It's by, how to say, who is leading the fashion of the current architecture. This is people are always looking something new, something unusual in their city. That's why architecture grow very fast and die very fast.
No, but look, when Bath was built, it was a fashion thing. It was designed there to attract people there for the season, and they went there for the season, and it started that way. But it was built so that it could be used, and has become a proper city, which now exists just like any other city. So you can have something which starts its life off, and its raison d'être in the first place is maybe, in this case, it's for an office and for people to come around and amuse themselves. But nevertheless, they might like it so much that you might want to make sure that it can be used so that it has a life of its own, which can carry on. Because you can't assume that people will want to knock it down and start again. It's so different from everything around it. It might actually stand out and might actually appeal.
Well, I think there's another point of view is by you can see this project differently, because when they ask us to build that kind of this kind of a village, European village, the material they use is kind of cornice in polystyrene. I don't believe if one day this polystyrene can remain like 100 years. I think in 20 years or 30 years, this will get damaged, and they were not going to repair it. They will just remove everything and maybe build a new project and attract more people. You see, the life of the architecture in China is just so short. They are not like in Europe. The architecture is in stone. This is our heritage. In fact, after all, this is communism. This is a country after the Cultural Revolution. The culture means nothing. The culture, this is not important for them. The most important is earning money and going fast, you see? And that's why our client has these things in their mind. And somehow we still need to present something that it might be pleasant and might be able to remain in the time. This is from our point of view, but we will not tell him that. We will just say, this is beautiful, this is nice, so just go to do with it. Because these clients, they don't have visions. They have money, they have the grandeur, they have this kind of grand idea, but they don't know how to do it subtly. That's why we need to help him to do this correctly.
Right. Has anyone else got questions?
So if you like, I can take a couple of questions from the audience,
Yeah.
Professor Simpson. All right, so Bruce asks to you, Professor Simpson. You draw historic villages connected by roads through their centers, but each village is a unit partly or wholly encircled by roads or by the center. Can you speak about the center edge tension and how the 400-meter radius neighborhoods nest into a community?
Right. Well, you basically run any roads. Basically, what you want to do is define each community as much as possible. So by running the road at the junction between the different communities, you actually interfere with each neighborhood as little as possible, but more significantly, you actually reinforce the difference. So what happens is people on one side go to the center of their own neighborhood, whereas people on the other side go into the center of their neighborhood. So it makes the neighborhoods more distinct and actually makes them work better. And this is what you see in most traditional cities.
All right, thank you very
Does
much.
that answer your question?
So depends, but Bruce seems to be fine with that. Okay, if not, he can elaborate on that. Sort of, he says. Okay.
Yeah.
I have one question to Phil.
Oh.
I saw one of your project with the oversized cornice on the top of the building, which is very interesting. And okay, can you tell us where this ideas comes from? Because you want to have it more remarkable from the street, or it happens that you like this kind of oversized cornice? This is very interesting. I never seen that house like that.
Okay, so the idea actually comes from the Singer sewing machine headquarters in Soho in New York, where I saw a gigantic cornice, and within it were these windows, because the cornice was a whole story high. Now that's about a 16-story building, much bigger. But across the street, and I'm sorry I didn't have a slide of these, but if you take that address and go to Google Street View, you will see these Victorian townhouses that look like they're operatic. They look like Brunhilde in the Nibelungen ring, like big eyebrows, and every floor is like 15 feet floor to floor. And there's gigantic expressions on this. I mean, it's almost silly, but we needed to at the same be as operatic in a contemporary way. So we have this one big like hairdo coming forward, right? And then we doubled up windows. And then we created that 2-story base, because the building across the street are, yes, there's an English basement and 3 stories, but they're 67 feet high. Well, we have, I think, was it 6 or 7 floors? So we had to make it look like there's a ground floor with very tall windows. And then there's a band of little square windows. It's almost like a transfer beam. Then there are 2-story windows. And then there's a cornice. Oh, and people live behind the cornice. But you don't think, oh, that's another story. So when we go to the community group or the review board, they say, oh, you're doing a building as with about the same number of stories, because we use that sleight of hand. It's like when my son, I can take my finger off. It's a little architect sleight of hand that makes it look in scale. And that's true of that big red brick building project too, where we double up windows. So the community thought it was a 6-story building, but it was 12. Because when they look at the drawings, it looks like it's in scale, but a different size, which is a subtle difference, I think. that answered? And it was fun.
Yes, yes, very interesting composition on the facades. Very for me, it attracted my eyes. You know, I can once I see it, I cannot forget it. This is very impressive.
Right.
Can we get your main points that are coming across through here? Because I think that there's a really fantastic weave of notions that we've just encountered, but there's also so much consistency in the fundamental ideas.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly need for gradation of space from being very public to being very private. And I would even say, I want to say one other thing. I was talking about looking at the windows in that project on 8th Street, and like it's a gallery, and you're looking into these paintings of domestic life, like a Revere. It's also the case that when we're designing these apartments, people inside are seeing a framed view of the life of the street. And so your window frame and its casing on the inside is almost as though you've hung a picture on the wall. And so just leave it at that. But I think there's a lot of consistency between what John was talking about, certainly what we were talking about, and what Raymond was doing.
Well, I think
Doesn't show up as closely, but certainly that village of buildings.
No, I think that the thing that comes across is the sense of creating lots of different public spaces, interconnected public spaces that really work almost as an open air external building. So you're using the buildings to create something greater. So you're getting something which is more than just the sum of the parts. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that also comes out of it is the variety of different types of buildings, whether it's just different types of buildings in terms of their treatment, or whether it's different types of uses. I mean, even in Raymond, in your village, you get different building types, you get different uses, etc., even though there's nobody actually living there quite in the way you would expect. So you get that as well. And I think the other thing is the idea of ornament and texture, and building up something which does have it's slightly more difficult to apply that to your buildings, Raymond, but certainly to the buildings that we do and that you do, Phil, that they have some relation to their context, in the sense that you're picking up on things which people will recognize belong to the place and belong to the area. In your context, it's actually quite the opposite. It's more you're actually doing something which is actually different.
Yeah, it's totally different. That's why I think it's interesting to show you this kind of urban design is turning the back to the city, not the facing to the city. You see, they want to create a part of a city which make people feel they are not in that city. This is a very ironic situation, but this is the client ask.
When people went on the grand tour from England, they came home and then they built things that they saw, because by doing that, they could actually enjoy them all the more. And also it allowed people who couldn't do the grand tour to actually experience that. And I'm not talking about people just building things in their back garden. You know, you go to Oxford and Cambridge colleges, and Dr. Keyes came back from Italy, and he built things at Keyes College, and they were part of the liberal arts education that people who went to Keyes College got. It wasn't just learning Latin and mathematics and all that, and literature, but they also understood what architecture was about and got some feel of it, even though it's secondhand. But it was done with various degrees of authority. So that's part of it. You've got to do it with some degree of authority when you execute it. So have we got to the end of our list now?
Herr Voresh, how many people still have questions?
So there are actually plenty of questions, and I think if we would discuss them all, it would take
a while.
Longer. But
I would like to invite, in that case, I'd like to invite the people who still have questions out there. Let's open the conversation all together.
because
Those who wish to stay, please stay. And those who have been so generous to give us their time and excellent wisdom, I want to thank you all very much. As a matter of fact, I would like to thank our presenters from today, and then we'll open the conversation after we say our thanks. Mr. Cantor, you can start the CEU thing. And I would like to thank our speakers from today, Craig Hamilton, Mark Wilson-Jones, Colin Mulhern, Hugh Petter, who wasn't there but presented, Roger Jackson, John Simpson, Tom Stroka, Robert Adam, Lucian Style, Joseph Jutras, Nadia Everard, Steve Muzon, Matthew Bronsky, Phillip, Esocoff.
Yep.
And Amy, thank you for being here as well and for providing much of the design. John again, Raymond Loïc Chan, Pablo Alvarez Funes, Imo Voreshk, thank you very much for helping us out. He has been really wonderful. Alison Hogg, thank you very much for being here. Cecilia Kent, for your presentation earlier, if you still are here. I hope I didn't miss anybody. The certificates and CU registration is going on, and I would like to, at this point, close out with a pitch. We just got, as we were speaking, turns out that we get a 30% discount on The Story of Architecture by Witold Rybczynski. So go out there and get that book. I actually am reading it. It's very sweet. He chooses 10 or 12 buildings, however many, to tell the story through examples. And he's going to be speaking. For him, writing this was a big learning experience, and he came out with this whole question of why ornament matters, which he's going to be speaking about on Sunday. Thank you, Arbon Precast Stone, AP Formliner, and Vetterstone for your generous contributions. And now let us open the conversation for a while until it either peters out or is executed. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all. Let's continue the conversation based on the presence of the people and the interest. I see here questions from.
So especially I would suggest Bruce, Catherine, Chris, Anne to join the conversation, because we're basically those four who are posting multiple questions. So it might be easier if you bring them up yourself.
That would be very nice. Catherine, do you want to speak? Bruce, do you want to speak? Thank you. And
Chris is fine.
Well.
He defers. It's okay.
I just want to say it's a general interest that I had and trying to hear about the approach between center and edge, and thinking of it isn't quite a walled arrangement, but it kind of echoes the walled cities that would have suburbs outside of the gates, because you have to make a definite choice to enter. If you're coming in from the bypass road, you have to make a definite choice to enter the center of Poundbury, the other examples. And so I just think it's, I wanted to hear about people's thoughts about that. And I know a lot about what the sort of stereotypical new urbanist thinking is, but I'm asking a different crowd here.
Well, there's no reason why you shouldn't have. Traditionally, cities in Europe, in particular, had a gateway, and this goes back to ancient times. The most important place was the gate, and it was even Aristotle had to live outside the gates because he wasn't born a Greek, and this was at Athens. So people lived out. The gate was actually quite an important thing, which defined the city and the citizens of the city. And everyone outside the gate, I presume, couldn't vote. So that sort of tells you quite a lot. It's the original whole definition of what a community is. And of course, that's not quite as rigid as it was back in ancient times. and we're much more.
So you don't favor townships outside the city?
No, that's fine. But what I'm trying to say, is
We're not doing
wrong
South
with
Africa.
it. There's nothing. Sorry, you were talking about South Africa?
Not South Africa.
No, I didn't think you were. No, as long as it's deliberate and it's not somehow, everything has connotations, but the reality is that having quarters and the quarters have identities is quite a good thing. I mean, even in small Italian cities, they're divided into quarters, and the quarters were usually gated because each one had a different affiliation. If you think of Siena, places like that, they all had a series of quarters which were actually distinct, and people were proud to live in their quarter.
And I also, we heard a different perspective from Raymond Chan, and I'd like to, sort of acknowledge that that's the same subject he was talking about, turning your back on the city to make it sort of a place apart, almost like a theme park. Could you talk about that, Raymond?
Yes, in China, let's say in the last century, early last century, we don't have that much populations, and by having their economic going raised up like in very, very short time, people also concentrated in one city, and to build all these floor areas to have all these people stay in the city, they have to build it like in repeat. So many areas, they are not considered to have a nice little tree, nice little park. They are just floor areas. So when people are living in this kind of city, they want to escape this kind of city vision. So by creating this kind of project, like an island in the city, that helps people to escape a little bit their routine ideas. They are not living in the atmosphere like we have in Europe or in United States with a lot of the open spaces. They are so compact. They are very compact. That's why once people create this kind of areas with a lot of differences, make you travel a little bit and forget your ordinary life, people loves it. I think the city has also this function that to satisfy somehow, if the city is too dense, we need the lower dense area to make people travel a little bit, to escape. And this project in Nanning is very interesting because in a weekday, it's closed to the public. You cannot go in. It's only open during the weekend because the people who work in this village, they are they are the people from the companies, they are working in the office. This is the office project in the weekday, but in the weekend, it's the open space for the city. So you have retails, you have coffees, you have restaurants very active in the weekend. And in the weekday, they are less active because they serve only the people who works in this area.
Do you see any possibility of eroding into the grids of high rises and developing any sort of urbanism inside of the super block developments?
The super block. Okay, that in China the land belongs to the government. And the government, it's very limited people who has the right to say, here, I want to build this, here, there, I want to build that. How organize the city? And these people, they are not formed. They are not, I cannot say they are not educated. They never get this kind of a professional architecture, urban knowledge or educations. Sometimes they just travel to foreign country. They love something and they took a picture and they bring back to the country. I want that. So they give this to architect and say, this is what I want, and just do it. So they don't consider how people who live in the city needs. They just consider at that moment when they are in a bored country, at that very moment, they feel something, a vibration, and he touched him, and he want to bring this touching idea to China by thinking people will like it too. You know, that is totally different. In Europe, it's more looking for matching with the city, with our culture, but there is totally disconnected, This is a different way of living. We cannot say yet good or bad. This is no urban design is a kind of urban design too. Look, if not, how can they keep developing and living in all this kind of city?
Maybe I can add to that, because I think what you're criticizing is like a form of consumerism, right? Because it's just like, okay, I want that, I go shopping just for a building. But actually, in Germany, we have it as well. So when you look at like new developments, it's basically indistinguishable where you are in Germany. It's all looks the same. It's all the same lane facades with no ornaments. It's just for their, it's also a form of consumerism. So I think in that regard, it's not so different. It's mostly a question of the mindset. Maybe in China, it's a little more extreme because it's like a carbon copy of what they maybe saw abroad. But you're not alone in criticizing that there.
No, but is it consumerism? Because you're getting the land is owned by the state. You've got very few people who have any control over this, and it's not really being done because people are driving it. They're not even driving it as consumers, are they, Raymond?
Yes, they are not. They are not. They
totally anti-democratic.
I think you're thinking about the developers are consumers. In other words, they're just looking for a fashion for their own ego. They're visiting upon people. Our public housing visited modernism in St. Louis, upon the people of St. Louis, and eventually those towers at Pruitt-Igoe were blown up. But that was people sort of trying to, I don't know, emulate something they thought was kind of cool somewhere else.
Well, it's not very different from. I mean, I understand that in England they were aristocrats, but it's not very different from having Lord Burlington own some land in the city and then lease it out for decades. I mean, it's not that different. It's just the difference between the government itself and feudal.
It's not feudal because
I said late feudal.
Well, it's not even that, because basically all that happened is that a developer came along, bought the land, but he just didn't buy the freehold. He bought the leasehold, which was for 99 years, and then had to build the stuff and sell it. And if he didn't sell it, then he went bust. So it's nothing. There's nothing feudal about it. The advantage.
Saying it's 50 years for offices and 75 years for housing, and it's 99 years in like George and London, and that's what I was thinking of. So I mean, it isn't that different.
Well, it is, because basically it's the capitalist system, not a centralized system that's doing it, which is slightly different. There is an advantage in having an overall landowner, because you have somebody who has a much longer term view of that particular area, and they need, because having a lease still gives them some rights. They're very few rights, but rights to disallow certain things, because you can actually put it into the lease to disallow certain things which would otherwise happen. So you can actually direct things. I mean, one of the things when the leasehold was for housing was abolished here under Margaret Thatcher, that it's had made it much more difficult for people to actually develop good housing which has somebody taking care of the long-term interest. It's shifted it all to become much more like the normal house builder development where they're just turning it over, going away, having sold it, couldn't care less what happens afterwards.
Well, I imagine that the communists would argue that they have that long-term interest.
Yeah, but not for the specific area. Their long-term interest is national.
Or is it a city ownership, Raymond Chan, or is it national?
It's more like a city ownership because each city organized the city in their way. The government just wanted to know that each city people are living and working efficiently to help the country have more prosperity. Let's say the country is like a machine, like a company.
Well, that's definitely it's really
it's totally
hard
different.
to, it's hard to parse out things in terms of cause and effect when the whole culture is grounded in effect and sees effect as cause. It's a real difficult kind of a circumstance. At the end of the day, you have simple development. I think Dan Morales said it somewhere that the same thing happened. Developers are bringing ideas to the US from elsewhere.
Sure.
Ideas were being brought from place to place since time immemorial. It's not like this all started now. It's not like we never had these kind of circumstances. The actual differences between standard fabric in the whole world is not, they're not that great. The Chinese did have their city planning principles. They still have them. Cities like Xi'an and elsewhere that are based on that. And those plans work exceedingly well, and they're imitated elsewhere. The Kasbah style that you might have more in certain areas that had supposedly less regulation and supposedly were more vernacular. Siena had a building code 1 inch thick in year 1250. So
it was a stone tablet, though.
Sorry?
It was one stone tablet, though. It was 1 inch thick, but it was a stone tablet.
Oh.
So
Actually,
No,
they had a brick. They had a marble model of a brick. That was their standard.
There you go.
They were very sophisticated in all these things. That's in the middle of the Middle Ages, to say nothing of the Bastides, which were straight ahead development projects where people attained freedom. They became unserfed by building a house for themselves and becoming taxable citizens as opposed to being serfs. Catherine, you have a question.
Yeah.
Something.
I just want to piggyback on this thing that Raymond said. And by the way, Raymond,
Hi.
you have blown my mind. I'm going to be thinking about what you said for a very long time, beside also your work, but the fact that the culture means nothing now after the Cultural Revolution, and maybe the Great Wall is the only thing that stays.
Sadly,
I swear
yes.
to God, next year, can we talk for like 3 hours about that?
Yeah, sure. I have this double culture because I was born in Taiwan, and Taiwan is occupied by the Japanese, so I have this Japanese culture too. And by working with all Chinese, and I have a lot of Chinese friends, and so I know how they think, how the way they think, what they have been through. And then I came to Paris for 20 years. So I know how the European and how the French think and the stories. That's why all this makes my head very complex. You have all kinds of ideas moving in. And when we create that project, when we listen to the client and we create a project, it becomes very different than how we used to do.
I see. And you really surprised me with the Venice, I'm going to call it the Yin Yang Island. You really threw me for a loop, and putting water in the middle is simply genius. And I love it. I do wonder in that case, who pays for the tunnel to the island?
The owner pays to turn onto the island.
And do you know, I just have to know, how much would that cost?
Well, just think about I don't think he will think about the cost. He just think about on this island, he has right to build 1.5 million square meters, and which means in this city, which is very expensive, it's like a Côte d'Azur in France. You see, with these white beaches, and that is the goal. And that is for generations. They are not going to build everything like in 10 or 20 years.
Oh.
For 10 years, they just spend the time to build that island only. You see?
Okay, it's still extraordinary, especially since no one can own the land, they can only rent it. Let me ask the other question, which just came up in this last talk about how the city organizes things their own way, but the government just wants to make sure that people are being taken care of and things are developed efficiently. Here's my question. Are there homeless people?
Yes, a lot. Yes, a lot.
And who takes care of them, or what has happened? Did they fall?
People takes care of each other without the public, without a great public security systems or healthy system. When we see people on the streets, if they are caught, we will give them clothes. If we see them that are starving, then we will give them food. The government will not come and say, "Oh, these poor people, I'm going to put you somewhere." It's like people, they have this charity in their hearts, then they think helping people, this is natural. This is very Confucius. This is the foundation of the Chinese culture. Even it's difficult, even it's hard to see right now.
All does. They only care about making money and going fast. So again, I have to talk to you another time about that. My last question on the Nanning City, which I think is fantastic. That first design you showed us of the facade, you showed us two big long elevations. To me, they reminded me of Prague or a medieval German city. Yes.
Do you mean this one?
Yes. Can you tell me who thought of that?
Well, this is very funny because the client, once we met the client, we went to China to see the client, and the client said, "Well, I went to Europe last month, and I think the European style is very good. I don't even know which country he has been, and he's just a European." Okay, European. Even in France, the architecture is so different from Alsace to Bretagne and then to the Bordeaux. Then this is so different. So we try to guess what is in his mind. And I say, "Do you have a picture?" And this show us this picture of Holland. And then he showed us some pictures of kind of a middle-aged building when he traveled to south of France. I want all this. So that's why you can see you have this kind of dungeon from the Viollet-le-Duc. You can see in the Quatre Personnes. And then on the left side, you see this kind of tower gate, a little bit, how to explain. And then you have in the middle, upper middle, you have this kind of stair. I don't know how to say this in English.
Steps.
Yeah, steps. Yes, steps. And then it's all mixed together. For them, it's one style, it's one story. But for us, this is just impossible to have all this kind of architecture together. Somehow we try to make it look like in harmony, even we understand what he wants is not really in harmony.
Thank you, Catherine.
I just want to finish. I love that you did that way, because what happened in the end, it was a simple, very rich composition, but it's nice that you came from this tremendous banquet first, because nobody ever does that. So thank you.
Thank you
very
very
much
Thank you
for your great
Thank you.
question. Bruce, 2 minutes. I think we're going to wrap up after this.
Yeah, I would just want to say, I'm wondering about two things right now. One is that, I don't know, I don't remember the latest Communist Party conference that they had several months ago. Somebody, not anybody I've heard of, made a long speech against sort of holdout Confucian ideas that made the news here. And that's one thing. And the other thing is, don't I remember that there was some sort of a edict or a change of direction that said that it was particularly mentioning the Huawei headquarters, which I guess is kind of like this Nanning project is a tiny version of that giant Huawei headquarters, which is sort of Europeanized. And there was a edict, I thought, or some sort of a pronouncement that sort of westernized development would be deprecated. So I'm wondering about how that's working. Both things, the sort of anti-Confucian traditionalist making, there was a remark about people standing in front of graves and doing stuff as being backwards. So I'm both wondering about the Confucian angle and also the sort of anti-Western. It was around the same time that they said you couldn't build more than 500 meters or whatever it was.
For the cultural traditional part, in their mind, this is not something they would like to keep. This is not something. This only belongs to the wealthy people when they want to show they have a taste, they have this cultural level. Otherwise, for the other people, they just want to be efficient and low cost. So this is most of people are like this. You have only very top level elite. They traveled, they understand what is good, what is bad. However, they cannot change the entire city, but they can change a part of that city. Just like this client, he went to Europe and then he took something and he think this is good. In fact, this concept, I can do it in Chinese style. That would be very nice, but people doesn't want. Because if you do that the Chinese style, people will not go. This is I already know.
Officially deprecated now? Is that do you know what I'm saying? That it's frowned upon to do that sort of thing now, or is that still okay?
It's still okay.
It's really interesting how they do that cross-cultural stuff in China. It's been going on for quite a while. I'd say it's been going on since the Middle Ages, basically, in some form or fashion. But I think that it's time to go to bed, everybody, or go to dinner, some folks. I want to again thank our very, very generous speakers, and we'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. EST at 6 p.m. CET. Thank you. Great questions, fabulous answers, and to be continued. Thank you.